Jordan Peterson has said some pretty wacky things in the past, but on Twitter, he's really outdone himself. The story begins with this response by MSNBC host Mehdi Hassan to the murder of 3 black people by a white supremacist in Florida.
Well, tonight, this brown Muslim is asking the white conservative community to do the same. Get your house in order. Crack down on the hate preachers who you've empowered and on their foot soldiers who you've emboldened. Condemn the rise of white supremacist ideology, of white supremacist terrorism, and denounce the daily racist outbursts on your cable news channels and your talk radio networks.
That's a very powerful point about how white communities aren't held to account for the actions of their members in the same way that minority communities are held collectively responsible. But this was how Peterson responded to it. You're not really brown, more like a light tan, just like white people. Plus, you're a Caucasian, by definition, buddy. Like the rest of us, Hassan was pretty mystified by that comment, following it up with this. Nothing to see here, just Jordan Peterson, a white man telling me I'm not brown, I'm actually white. Also, how am I a Caucasian by definition? Peterson's answer to that question was with another poem. He said this: You're not black and you're not Asian. What's left? Caucasian. It's not that difficult. And I didn't call you white, not that I care. I pointed out that your true color is tan, which it is, more or less like mine. And your idiot, a white man comment, implying I have no right to notice whatever the hell your color is not the least bit intimidating or damning as far as I'm concerned. People listening on the podcast won't be able to see. There's so many weird line breaks in this. So this kind of strange racial invective, it is structured the same way as that poem about I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox poem. It's kind of entertaining in its own way. Anyway, that answer actually kind of cleared things up, because what Peterson is doing is resurrecting long debunked biological race science of the kind that is still loved today by white supremacists. That's right, exactly the kind of white supremacists Hassan was talking about. If Peterson were living in the 18th or the 19th centuries, he would have been considered right. According to the race categorizations used by white supremacists in those days, Indian people were classified as Caucasian. Back then, Caucasian was scientifically thought to be the superior of the 3 biological human races, the others being black people and the people of East Asia and the Pacific. So Peterson's bizarre comments look less like a simple anachronism and instead more like a troubling throwback to the era of skull calipers and pseudo-scientific racism. There's also the bit about Mehdi Hassan not really being brown and instead more of a light tan. And what Jordan Peterson's doing here is a move that I like to call racist bamboozlement. How this works is that in order to destabilize your opponent, if they're talking about racial injustice, is that you simply deny that race plays any role in how they're perceived at all. How can you be a credible voice on racism when you're merely tan? It's such a denial of social reality, such a flagrant dismissal of how race shapes someone's experience, that your opponent will be totally thrown off. They'll be staggering, swaying, and unable to form a comeback. And then there you have it. Boom. Racist bamboozlement. Dahlia, before we move on, do you think that Jordan Peterson really believes the stuff he's saying? That he can look at Mehdi Hassan and goes, yeah, you're Caucasian, just like me?
I think what this is that despite Jordan Peterson being someone who is in some context taken seriously as someone who should talk about things like race and identity, he actually doesn't even have like a sociology 101 undergraduate module understanding of what race is. Like, he actually does believe that it is a biological reality. He actually believes that that racial categories are inherent categories, that they're reducible to skin color, and that they're not socially constructed categories that people are moved into and out of by representational strategies. Now, that is something that like A-level students can understand. So I don't understand why, a so-called public intellectual who is given liberty to spill so much ink on this topic as if he's some kind of authority on it when he doesn't even have the basic theory in hand. Now, obviously, I'm sure he would argue that any theory that seeks to understand race as a social construct is, just woke blob nonsense. I'm sure that he would be thrilled to hear that he doesn't have a sociology 101 understanding of what race is. But forget about him. I think more broadly, we suffer from this as a society. We saw it in the last story, in the story about, the denial of institutional racism by the government. We saw it in the story about French approaches and French ideologies, French state ideology to the question of racial difference. We still don't, even though we talk about it all the time, we still can't grapple with the idea that race is not itself a scientific or biological fact, but that doesn't mean that the effects of it are not very real and very concrete and measurable. And that to me is what I find so frustrating. Look, Jordan Peterson can have whatever opinions he wants to have, whatever. What frustrates me is that he then gets put into the room with people whose life's work is to study this concept in a serious, historical, and rigorous way. And they're put as an equal interlocutor with someone who can't grasp the fundamental basics that how you are racialized is historically and spatially specific, that these aren't inherent categories, that they are categories that are used to mark people in ways that are convenient for a broader political economic order and are movable and changeable and, aren't essential categories. So that to me is what I really learned. And I already knew it, but that's what I really was reaffirmed by, what this kind of particular bizarre outburst from Jordan Peterson really reaffirmed for me. And it's actually much bigger than Jordan Peterson. It's actually a very broad issue, I think, that this literacy on what racism is still so lacking, despite the amount of time we spend talking and writing about race.
If you're interested in hearing a total debunking of scientific racism or the biological basis of race, I interviewed Dr. Adam Rutherford. He's a geneticist who wrote a book called How to Argue with a Racist, and we talked about the clustering of particular characteristics according to geography, and also how an Australian study accidentally found out which university department has the most sex. So check that out. Jordan Peterson's online shenanigans, however, have drawn the attention of his professional body, and the College of Psychologists of Ontario, Peterson's home province in Canada, have had enough. Last November, the college decided that Peterson would have to complete a, quote, continuing education or remedial program or face losing his license to practice psychology. That came after it received dozens of complaints about Peterson's online conduct. Peterson then took the college to court to overturn its ruling. But just last week, he lost his case, with the court upholding the college's decision. On his podcast, Peterson vowed it wouldn't be the end of the matter and that he'd be making the whole matter public.
So, and we've cordoned off our life. I can deal with this without it having interfere with everything else I'm doing. I've talked to Tammy. I've talked to you and Julian. My family's on my side. We're solidly committed to this. I have a good legal team. We have the money necessary to do this, and we have the connections. So if the college wants to re-educate me, they're more than welcome to try. But if they think they're going to do it in secret, they've got another think coming.
Well, with that, it was nice talking to you.
Sorry, I didn't realize you'd ended that clip with, well, Dad, it was nice talking to you. Obviously, his daughter Michaela is also kind of, a bit of a conspiracy-minded crank herself, but that was really funny. Also, if you close your eyes and you listen to Jordan Peterson, you go, that's a very angry Kermit the Frog. What could the College of Psychologists have done to anger Kermit the Frog so? Talia, tell me, visualize, if you will, the feeling you would have if you walked into a doctor's office at a time of crisis and your psychologist was Jordan Peterson.
I mean, I think it would give me good perspective, because I think I'd be like, whatever crisis I'm going through, clearly my crisis is not as acute as whatever's going on here.
I've
Like,
never been in a beef
wow.
coma. I've never eaten myself into a beef coma.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, I just think that Jordan Peterson is like an uncool person's idea of a cool person, and a not smart person's idea of a smart person. Like, I just don't understand how anyone looks at this person as like, oh my God, this man has to tell me how to live my life, because clearly he's doing such an amazing job. But anyway, I do think this is interesting. I mean, first of all, I'm sure that when he got the news that his university was going to send him on a re-education course, he probably jumped for joy, because I can't think of anything more brilliant for him as a branding exercise for him than, to say, oh, my university is trying to re-indoctrinate me because I have the balls to say that race is a biological fact and that Mehdi Hassan is light tan, not brown. Like, this is their bread and butter. Like, they love to be quote unquote cancelled, because that then becomes a springboard for, gaining a great bigger following, for getting all sorts of brand deals or book deals or whatever. Like, there's no quicker way to a good book deal than to be quote unquote cancelled. So I'm sure he's thrilled. But I do think, look, psychology is a very specific kind, it's very particular kind of academic work, because you're not just talking about someone writing books and writing articles and stuff. You are talking about a clinical setting, and people who do clinical work have a particular code of conduct that they have to abide by. And you can disagree with that, but I do think overall it's pretty healthy and pretty good for, if you are engaged in clinical work in healthcare settings, that there has to be kind of decorum or particular remits through which you can behave publicly. Having said that, I can't imagine anyone who would be, particularly opposed to Jordan Peterson's public profile would go and see him as a therapist. I think that would be kind of wild. But I do think it's an interesting point to say that, this isn't quite the same as general academic freedom of speech. This is actually a kind of clinical issue that is governed by a different set of principles, and kind of has to be, as opposed to, academic freedom where we're just talking about people publishing books and, articles. No, we're dealing with patients here. So it's kind of a different kettle of fish.
There's a really interesting piece about this by Amias Srinivasan in the LRB, which basically makes the argument that academia is not meant to treat all ideas equally. In fact, academia is supposed to be a process of sorting through good ideas and bad ideas. So this idea that you're being cancelled if your ideas are being found to be flawed or lacking or poorly evidenced or, logically unsound, that's not your academic freedom of speech being suppressed. You're being subjected to an academic process and you're being found wanting. I mean, to give another kind of example, my job is to chat shit for a living, right? So you can't really punish me for chatting shit. That's my job. Whereas the job of a psychologist is somewhat different. There are professional standards there. There aren't at Novara Media. I am joking in case Guido Fawkes is going to clip that.